Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar titled Localizing Your Biopharma Commercial Strategy. This webinar is co-sponsored by KMK Consulting and the Exicor Group. KMK and Exicor form a partnership to support pharmaceutical firms in strategizing and achieving better market share for their products. My name is Rob Stewart, and I am co-moderator for today's presentation. I'm joined with Lisa Pilla today as co-moderator, and a panel of industry experts that include Quinn Liu, who is a Sales Force Effectiveness Director at KMK Consulting, Dr. Danny Stimler, Principal of Ecosystems Development at the Exicor Group, and Chris Lasanti, Founder and Head of the Exicor Group. For logistics today, we have enabled a chat function in the Demio platform, and we encourage feedback and questions throughout the presentation. Lisa and I will relay this information as we receive it. And at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Pilla, who will be going over the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Rob, and welcome, everybody. Just wanted to quickly run through what we plan to cover in the next half hour. The first thing we're going to start with is talking about how to define an ecosystem specifically as it relates to mapping out healthcare landscapes in the biopharma industry. Then we will get into the key players that comprise an ecosystem and talk about some examples of best practices regarding engagement strategies. There will be a case study that Chris Lasanti will go through regarding an example of not only mapping out an ecosystem and developing engagement strategies, but also putting it into execution across multiple functions of field-based teams. And then we'll get into some of the more pragmatic discussions around how do you manage and execute this ecosystem model that seems to really be spreading pretty widely across many companies in the industry, and then wrap up with a few takeaways for you and some information about where you can get some further materials regarding ecosystems. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Thanks, Lisa. So to start today's discussion, what we wanted to do is ask the audience to help us by participating in a quick survey. You'll see a poll that should be appearing in which several definitions of the ecosystem are presented. Please choose which one that you think is not an ecosystem. And while we are waiting for the response here, what I'd like to do is introduce Dr. Danny Stimler. Danny, I know you've been working with ecosystem models for quite a long time, and I'd be interested in getting your feedback on not only the results that you see here, but also your perception and your understanding of what an ecosystem is as it pertains to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I'm just looking at the responses coming in, and obviously some of the answers in there were designed to have a little bit of fun at the start of the session. But in terms of what we mean by an ecosystem, what we mean is really the set of customers of a pharma or medical device manufacturer and their interactions with respect to a specific market. The market could be, for example, an MSA, a CBSA, or a larger entity. And we've gone into this space because some years ago we found that in order to successfully commercialize and launch a number of products, very specific knowledge was needed about what is specific to a particular market and the customers and their interactions. So a working definition of an ecosystem really is a set of customers and their interactions with respect to a particular therapeutic area. These are not general views of a healthcare market. These are very specific views with respect to a particular therapy or therapeutic area.
So Danny, what's the right answer?
What's the right answer? Well, the right answer, the closest right answer is the one which not so many people have chosen, ironically, Lisa, basically number 2.
And nephrology group practice, is that because it's just one component of an ecosystem?
No, well, that's right. A nephrology group practice or any other group practice, independent provider, hospital, IDN, continue the list, is simply one component of the many components in an ecosystem. And without capturing all of them and understanding that you're looking for the interactions, that wouldn't really be an adequate definition.
And it seems like most people thought Silicon Valley's entrepreneurs is not an ecosystem, yet it is. So maybe a quick explanation of why it is.
Of why the definition I gave is?
No. Why are Silicon Valley's entrepreneurs considered to be an ecosystem?
Well, I think they're an ecosystem because they work together to incubate, fund, and provide guidance for innovative ideas. So from the general point of view of creating something and launching it, that is an ecosystem, but not with respect to necessarily with respect to traditional pharma and medical device products.
And it looks like the original ecosystem, the Amazon rainforest. You can get a lot of answers, but that's the one we learned about when we were in school.
Okay.
All right, so that was interesting, and it's always good when it's hard to find the right answer to these polls. So that's good. We've got people thinking. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Chris, I know you've been doing a lot of work with ecosystems, and just curious, after we've had some fun with these different examples of ecosystems, at the end of the day, I mean, ecosystem, the terminology really did start with natural ecosystems like coral reefs and the Amazon forest and so on, where they're all the different life forms are interdependent on one another. So is this really just another one of those buzzwords that passes through pharma from, time to time as a means of trying to get people to look at making modifications to their model, but essentially it's really just local business planning at the end of the day?
Lisa, you're correct to a certain degree, but I would say it's not. In that traditional pharma has looked at customers from a transactional basis. And now, from what we've seen over the years, biopharma manufacturers and their customer-facing teams are focused on customer engagement, and they're focused on partnering with customers. The traditional focus, like I said, has been HCP, reach and frequency. Now, in a healthcare ecosystem, it's all about the interconnectivity of those stakeholders. So they can be across multiple channels. And we're focusing on not just a disease state, but total patient care and patient outcomes. And again, in order to achieve that, biopharma manufacturers must communicate their messaging, their value proposition, and convey their resources to those various stakeholders in that geography. And again, let's get away from activities and focus on meaningful impact due to engagement.
Yeah, Chris, when I was trying to get my arms around this as well, when you presented this whole concept, you had a slide that I think you have to share that really helped identify and break down the differences between this ecosystem and more of a traditional market. Why don't you walk us through that? That helped me. I think it'll help the audience as well.
Sure, thanks. I mean, traditionally, biopharma manufacturers have handled the different customer channels separately. You have market access, which handle payers, and in some organizations, health systems right now. In certain organizations, health systems are covered by the sales teams. But advocacy groups, government, and patients are handled by, again, traditionally siloed functions, particularly within larger manufacturers. But in our model, the ecosystem, healthcare ecosystem model, we understand through the detail analysis, the interconnectivity around the patient of these different channels. So our recommendations are around new models, new deployment models, differential resourcing, so that combined account teams of cross-functional teams can engage these customer stakeholders in a much more coordinated, collaborative fashion to, like I said before, have that impact and engagement with those different customer types.
Right, right. So that fundamentally changes the game, right? I mean, I think you have to have a whole new business model and selling. How does that work? How does a new selling model work in this kind of an arrangement?
Well, number one, again, it's a sales team collaborative focus. No longer can representatives just call on HCPs in a silo from RAMs and NAMs engaging payers or CAMs engaging health systems. They're all interconnected. And that model, there must be the right metrics, organizational structure, the appropriate roles and responsibilities defined for those field team members, so they can work in a concerted fashion to engage those multiple connected stakeholders in that geography. It requires changes in sales operations, changes in reporting. There's a whole infrastructure component to it, as well as technology. And in a few moments, Quinn will discuss how technology can bring together all these disparate data sources to come into one common platform.
Right, right. And I know that when you think about these ecosystem models, Chris, you also you like to break them into different categories, so that way you can create, I would say, different examples of what they look like.
Sure.
I think you have another slide
We
that helps us describe that. Great.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked on a lot of geographies around the country over the past several years, and this is just an example. Once you analyze and generate the insights from 10 to 15 ecosystems, we can then understand similarities, differences, drivers, and barriers between different ecosystems or different geographies. Some geographies can be very payer-centric, where there's a much greater focus on contracting and even interacting with payer providers as well. Then there are your typical prescriber or HCP-centric geographies, where a more typical reach and frequency model would be appropriate, because that's something that really hasn't changed that much. And then we have very account or IDN health system centric or focused geographies, where you have presence of disease state COEs, you have a very high focus on population health and coordination of care, and a lot of academic medical center influence, because we know these COEs and academic medical centers are typically housed within a larger health system. So, like I said, these different ecosystem types or segments do require a different go-to-market model and a different set of customer-facing resources, as well as marketing resources and different value propositions and messaging, to ensure we have engagement with the stakeholders in these different ecosystem types.
Yeah, sounds very specific. Lisa, have we had any chat comments come up at this point?
Yeah, we have a question here about closed accounts or accounts that have limited access to people from biopharma companies. As we know, there's a lot of these in certain geographies where they're very, very strict about no pharma policies. So the question is about, how does the ecosystem model maybe open up access or work within those types of environments? Chris or Danny?
I'm sorry, Lisa, I had a technology issue. Can you repeat the question? I apologize.
How have you seen access to closed or limited access accounts opened up with an ecosystem model in those geographies where, they have very strict rules about access or interactions or engagements with pharma companies? Does this model work there?
So it does, Lisa. I think, I'll let Danny expand upon it as well. But once the analysis is performed and we find and understand the right stakeholders at a closed system, we try and understand what are their needs, what gaps do they have, is it in population health, is it in patient education, so that one individual from that sales team or account team can focus in engaging that key customer. Sometimes it just takes one key point of entry at a health system to engage appropriately and then expand from within. Danny, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, so when we get involved in doing this kind of work at early stages of the commercialization, so in the scope of our work includes not just ultimately field resources, such as traditional sales and market access, but we're also working with people even on the clinical side, the medical side, in terms of real world evidence. One of the things that we do in the study of some of the accounts is, as Chris mentioned, to identify needs and stakeholders. And at those earlier stages, we're able to often identify joint needs of the manufacturer and the account. And there, often work can be done collaboratively or to provide evidence which is not yet at the level of a sales interaction where there's often more resistance. And by working collaboratively with the accounts, often the trust and the relationship that derives from that, as well as, of course, the results of that collaboration, can then open the doors to accounts that otherwise may have been cynical. I think another important aspect of the whole approach, which I think was a little bit outlined, the traditional pharma planning approach is to look at, who are the high writers for a product without necessarily realizing that to become a high writer, it's taken years of work. If you're launching a product, you're actually probably more interested in who are the more likely adopters for your product and what's the value of having a particular prescriber or a particular system adopt because of the influence they have. So that's the kind of work we also do as part of this ecosystem approach.
Great.
So, Danny, before we move on, there's a couple of questions here related to what you said. So I'll start with this one. So in an ecosystem model, what integrated role does health economics or real world evidence field-based teams play? And are you seeing that there might be a loosening of some of the traditional firewalls that exist between medical affairs and commercial, being able to collaborate as a team and engage with these various accounts and customer groups?
So let's back up first to the earlier question, Lisa. So the first question was about real-world evidence and HEOR. So as I said earlier, when we're involved in the earlier stages of commercialization work, where the goal is simply not to think about what will be the field deployment, we often are identifying opportunities and needs at certain accounts where there is a high reliance upon collaborations, upon evidence generation, and things of that kind. And we engage HEOR as well as medical and other stakeholders to be at the party. In an example that we're working on with a client now, there is a national data collection effort in a certain disease state, which is being, that national data collection effort is being conducted at many local centers. So we've pointed this out to our client as a way for them to engage locally with some of these centers, to have their product potentially used and proved there, and also to begin to gain access to some of the broader data sets.
Mm-hmm. And what about what are you observing in terms of medical and commercial interaction?
So, so first of all, I think that we are seeing that the marketplace is actually requiring a lot more coordinated interaction, although of course compliance people are struggling with what the right levels of interaction should be. We've used this ecosystem approach now with quite a number of specialty products, which are increasingly complicated products. So the marketplace is requiring a lot more information about the products. And in many cases, the account approach is often to find who are the key not just opinion leaders in the not just in the traditional sense of key opinion leaders, but there's a whole new set of decision makers and influencers within systems that are looking for information and for answers to very specific clinical and medical questions. And so the question is, how do we make sure that those resources are appropriately engaged in a compliant manner?
All right, I have a question for Chris. Are there certain areas of the country that may respond to an ecosystem model better than the traditional approach? And if so, what are the attributes or factors that would suggest that an ecosystem model is a better approach in those markets? So how do you know this is a good spot for an ecosystem?
I'll give a specific example, Lisa. That's a good question. I would say, for example, certain geographies, and it does depend on the therapeutic area, but certain geographies that could have heavy government influence would be a perfect example. And one of the ecosystem types that we've identified in the past is what I call a public-private partnership, where there is significant interaction in care delivery and funding between a public institution like a corrections system in LA, for example, and a health system like UCLA. And a specific example, we do know that UCLA does deliver care for offenders in the LA County prison system. So a specific model where there's a potential government affairs or corrections type role to engage with these type of partners would be very effective. So
yeah, and there's a comment in the chat about the benefits of working with partners in an ecosystem model and not your traditional roles, that they can help open up access for reps. All right, so Rob, I think we are going to move on to the next topic, and we'll get back to some more of these comments in the next.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Lisa. What I'd like to do is transition a little bit from the creation of the ecosystem model to then operationalizing it. And I think we can look at this from two different perspectives, a strategic and a technical aspect. And I want to start with you, Chris, just briefly, like what strategically do you need to think about to operationalize this ecosystem model? And I believe you do have an example that illustrates this.
We do. I would say, it's a people, process, and technology discussion. And first of all, when we perform an ecosystem analysis, we're using market research data, primary and secondary. We're using third-party data typically supplied by our client or other data provider, and that data is fragmented, coming from disparate sources. So from a technology perspective, we need a solution to bring those disparate sources of data together so it can create actionable insights. So that requires work from an IT and data management perspective. From an execution perspective, people-wise, we need, like I said earlier, to have the right roles and responsibilities defined, the right metrics and KPIs, the right business and account plans, so the field, no matter what field function you're in, knows how to execute, knows what the tactics are. These plans have been collaboratively produced and developed so that this ecosystem team can seamlessly execute, engage their customers with precision.
Great, thanks, Chris. And that's a great lead into a discussion with Quinn. So Quinn, Danny talks about the fragmentation of the data, talks about some of the plans that need to be brought in, and there's this whole process that needs to be put together. How do we get this integrated into an existing pharmaceutical that's already doing a lot of this, but in the more siloed description that was provided?
I think we definitely have to consider it in 3 dimensions. The first one is data management, right? As we mentioned before, there will be a lot of data coming from different sources, like the data coming from research, the data you purchase from data vendors, and also the data provided by the field team, their activities, their field intelligence. So we have to kind of consuming all together, we'll manage it, and also have the single source of truths in place in order to provide the downstream process. And the second part will be the analytical part. both quantitative and the qualitative part of analytics. So in order to transfer those data into insight, which will require certain skill set and the business knowledge, be able to extract this information out from the humongous amount of data sources. All right. Then the last piece, which will be the applications, which help you to organize all the meaningful information from the database or data sources to be more placed as a user-centered way, so people can easily consume it and also be able to collaborate with each others and share the insights and be able to do things on top of it.
All right, got it. So data insights and be able to see. Now, when you build this ecosystem, it's certainly not static in nature, right? Each one, I'm sure, is evolving over time. If the company has ambitions to grow, they want to have additional ecosystems. So how do you maintain and grow this?
Yeah, you're
with that in mind?
absolutely right. So this solution needs to be dynamic, right? Whenever those information get refreshed, it needs to be reflected on top of the applications. So normally when we implement this type of solution, we will start with a pilot group, which is gonna be a selected ecosystem only with those core functions like account planning, like ecosystem assessment components in there, and also field team will get involved. So, but after the fine tune and working closely with those teams, we will have this solution ready and also be able to expand to all the ecosystem and potentially bring in new functional teams such as MSLs, trainings, and also marketing team. Definitely when we're building those new teams in there, we have to keep compliance in mind in order to prevent any of the legal issue happening. So eventually will become a truly one-stop shop platform which can systematically carry all the institutional knowledge and the best practice moving forward.
Yeah, that's helpful. I understand that you've prepared a video that I think gives a good example of what this looks like from a conceptual standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about what we're going to see?
It's pretty much just a vision of the future, what we're thinking of from a technology perspective, how it will help and how it will bring additional value to you from implementing this type of system. So you can just go ahead and play the video then.
All right, Ariel.
Familiar reach and frequency selling models are being replaced as the number of decision makers within each healthcare organization grows. Sales data alone is not enough. Reps need to understand the complete ecosystem to succeed. But even with the best data, lack of a user-friendly all-in-one tool means coordination gets muddy and communication breaks down. That's why you need a localized commercial strategy that you can easily manage with a suite of tools to help teams collaborate like never before. The local ecosystem model allows you to manage your team through a cloud-based market assessment platform, giving you the ability to deliver the right information to your reps at the right time. A flexible way to manage end-to-end incentive compensation plan solutions. Custom business and accounting plan to drive synergy between different teams working within the same market. Imagine the possibilities. Identify key decision makers in each account. Enable more accurate geography forecasting. Easily monitor team performance. Seamless collaboration and successful management of large-scale activities across the entire team.
Well, that was helpful, Quinn. Lisa, let's check that chat window again, see if there's any more questions. You're on mute, Lisa.
In geographies where you don't have health plan access, you don't have reimbursement, have you seen examples where the ecosystem model has maybe resulted in changes to the reimbursement situation? Because you're now interacting, I would imagine, with some more of the decision makers and stakeholders in some of those decisions and in this more cross-functional approach.
Yeah, that's a perfect example for differential resourcing, Lisa. In this instance, I wouldn't send in a field team, calling on HCPs heavily. I would focus my RAM or NAM building relationships with key insurers and payers, and ensure reimbursement is in place and access is in place before doing anything else. Engage with some stakeholders at key health systems to demonstrate the value of your brand, especially if it's a health system with a captive payer in that geography. That might be a good avenue. But once we do the analysis, no one knows these geographies hopefully better than your field teams. So our analysis, the insights around the stakeholders, understanding what decisions these different stakeholders make, we're going to know better who to engage in those geographies.
All right. The question about the demo that you did, Quinn, does that replace a CRM platform, or is it more of a data ecosystem reporting platform that would be used in conjunction with the CRM?
You will have certain CRM components in there, but it's not replacing the existing CRM at all. It's more advanced reporting platform with some of the input capture function in there to be able to better collect the data from the field team. But it's not like a replacement of CRM system, and it can be integrated with your existing CRM system smoothly, so you don't have to jump around to get those information.
Okay, but you can integrate it with a CRM system to keep track of the customer database and the interactions. Okay. Let me see. You can additionally use straight-to-consumer models to ultimately increase market share, to then target better formulary coverage from payers, not having to compromise reimbursement. That is a comment from the chat. Any thoughts on that, Chris or Danny? Straight-to-consumer models.
Given the world we're in today, where remote interaction is very prominent, and social media interaction, I think there's huge opportunity where campaigns could be tailored to the needs of consumers in a specific ecosystem or the needs of providers. So absolutely. Danny, you have a thought? You're on mute.
Seems that the comment is really about trying to drive consumer demand to then influence payers. Yeah, I mean, surely it can be done. I think it varies a lot by therapeutic area. There was an earlier question around, which ecosystems are amenable. So, we know that we've had experience lately with a company with some dermatology products that would typically not be covered by Medicaid. On the other hand, we've done quite a lot of work with mental health products where the Medicaid segment is a huge component of the overall market. So if you were dealing with products that, for example, would typically not be covered by Medicaid because Medicaid perceives there are alternatives, there'd probably be low utility in pursuing a sort of Medicaid-driven approach, whereas for many mental health products, Medicaid is actually quite critical. So that's the kind of therapeutic-specific insights that we look for and what to do with them, so we can better advise clients on what's the right approach, what's the right mix of resources.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to do another quick audience poll. We're coming close to the end of the webinar. So can you, Ariel, can you put up the next audience poll, please? All right, so here's this question. If you work in a company that is currently implementing an ecosystem model, pick yes, and if not, no, just to get a sense of what's going on out there.
Lisa, while we're waiting for the results, I'm interested in your perspective, given your background, on how important the collaboration across the business functions is, because that I think was, that captured my attention in the video, and be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the critical success factor of this model, and the reason why sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I think as Chris pointed out, when you're dealing with a group of multiple stakeholders, there's those with the very scientific interests, those who are much more interested in the economics. You have a lot of people that are just more interested in the operational aspects of practice management, and the ones on the front line trying to find the right treatment for the patient that they can get with the least out-of-pocket costs and provide the best care. And now there's so many other needs that are needed as these health systems are getting larger and larger, and they're really focusing more on patient identification, risk stratification, and coordination of care. And no one function can respond to all those requests. So in my experience, the stronger the cross-functional team, the greater the engagement with the customers in that area, and ultimately, hopefully, the better the quality of the care that is administered to the patients. So it's essential.
Great. Well, the poll is very interesting. It's 25-75. So that feels about what you were talking about, Chris, in terms of the adoption of this so far. That it's picking up steam. I think if we took this 3-4 years ago, that rate would be much lower.
Absolutely. I saw one question in the chat about, is this applicable to smaller specialty pharma? And I would say all the work that we've done over the past several years has been for just that. Smaller pharma with less resources that really need differential deployment to understand where do we put the right people with the right skills at the right time. So that's what our ecosystem analysis and modeling can help achieve.
So I think in relation to that, maybe it's time to go to the case study, because I know that in that case study you show the difference in the investment that's needed with the ecosystem model, because it sounds like it's big pharma type of a model, because it sounds like you have to have lots of functions, you have to have lots of people, but I know that your experience has been with these smaller companies, so maybe you can walk through that case.
I believe we have a few slides on this as well. Again, it's who are we targeting? How are we prioritizing channels for customer engagement? In this particular instance, we had a client with a behavioral health therapy that was a year or so before launch. They had limited resources from a field perspective and a marketing perspective. And after many conversations with us, determined that a much more focused ecosystem model would be quite appropriate based upon their constrained resource situation for launch. So we developed some very specific strategies and tactics with that in mind, so their field teams could best engage and best drive brand adoption in these specific geographies. One example, I think I mentioned it before, was creating a role for correction systems, but the others were different opportunities. One would have been for an opportunity to engage a health system with a real world evidence generation project to create evidence for better engagement with payers in that particular ecosystem. So that was one example. Another example in this specific geography was the prevalence of community health centers. That really was where the majority of the HCPs treating this specific disease state resided. So in this specific geography, we felt that a reach and frequency model was more appropriate, even though other geographies with different characteristics required more account focused on health systems, greater focus on payers, et cetera. So, this particular instance gave some great results. I believe we have it on an upcoming slide, but I will say, we analyzed about 15 geographies for this specific client. 70% of those geographies where the field was appropriately trained, these geographies did have improved uptake over the remaining ecosystems with a national approach. Can we move the slides up, please? Yes, thank you. And what was given this client was really focused on reducing spend locally. We were able to reduce their investment by 20% in the ecosystems that we studied, that we planned for. So we had greater uptake and adoption above national average in this pilot, and we had lower investment in these geographies. So the results were certainly achieved here. Yes, they are.
The results are real. That's great. So any remaining feedback from the audience, Lisa?
No, I don't see any. I just want to let everybody know, though, if you click on the handouts tab, you can get the white paper, which provides a lot of the tools and the frameworks that are used in the ecosystem model. So I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to that. Sure.
Great, thanks. So let's go back to the beginning and have just an open-ended feedback from the audience now that we've exposed our concept and execution of what an ecosystem is. Be interested in seeing how you describe an ecosystem as it potentially pertains to your business. You can enter it in the chat box. We'd like to see what your thoughts are and provide just a couple of final
even just
thoughts
one
and
word,
feedback.
like complicated,
Right.
fascinating, scary. Okay, we've got targeted markets. Anybody else have any thoughts they want to put into the chat? Very useful, massive, lots of stakeholders. That's it.
Okay.
Oh, commercialization and strategy building. Like turning the Titanic.
It's like turning the
Radical
Titanic.
change in approach.
Yeah.
It is. So just given all this feedback, I'd be interested in the panel's final thoughts on these comments, and if this reflects your consistency, or if you have another perspective.
Well, I really like some of the comments, and for a big pharma organization that is attempted to implement the ecosystem model, it is like navigating the Titanic. And it is a radical change. But if you're a smaller organization, or even a larger mid-size organization that's looking to do things differently and have better customer engagement, I would consider implementing or piloting the ecosystem model, especially in certain geographies that we can analyze that are particularly difficult to influence, difficult to engage with stakeholders. There are a lot of stakeholders out there, but it's a matter of understanding who are those that matter and make the key decisions.
Makes sense.
Great. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. Appreciate all of the input from the panel, and I think we do have several takeaways from this. First, it's apparent that the ecosystem provides what we like to call the whole patient care focus. And that's seen by different perspectives, right? I think Chris gave the great example of the interconnection of the segments and how they relate together. Also highlighted was the stakeholder engagement component. We heard about how deep relationships and the partnerships can certainly trump the more traditional transactional reach and frequency type models for certain instances. And from the operational perspective, Quinn talked a little bit about building the whole cross-functional planning and execution solution, leveraging some of the ecosystem model that includes data insights and collaboration that gives that much more strategic ability to plan and execute. And finally, on the impact base, I think Chris very well illustrated the impact that this ecosystem can have when done correctly and seen through. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa for final words.
Well, I just want to thank Kuhn, Danny, and Chris for sharing your experiences and firsthand knowledge of the ecosystem model with everybody. For those of you who were able to participate, we want to thank you for joining us. If you are interested in more information about this, Rob will be able to give you some links and things so that you can get in touch with the panel. I saw there were a few requests for how do you reach out to people. And, you know, I can say I was recently at a meeting at a specialty pharma company that I would say is a mid-sized company, and they just implemented this model. So it's definitely something that is taking hold. Maybe it's not called ecosystems, but this whole more of a cross-functional engagement approach and mirroring more of how health systems are and integrated networks are set up is certainly gaining a lot of traction and giving all of us the opportunity to have that impact and improve outcomes as Chris stated. So thank you all. And Rob, I'll turn it back over to you about connecting and more information.
Great, thanks, Lisa. We will be emailing a link to this webinar. That'll also include a link to the white paper that Chris reviewed. I know that was shared in the handouts as well. So with that, we will look forward to connecting with you. If you have any further questions, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to continue this conversation and help you with any further information that you want regarding ecosystem planning. And
thank you.
We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for attending, and have a nice rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.